Alexandria Carter stands frozen in the packed courtroom, her cleaning uniform painfully out of place among the expensive suits. The judge glares down at her seconds from holding her in contempt for her interruption. The billionaire defendant Nathan Reed sits abandoned at his table after his high-profile attorney fled minutes earlier. Whispers ripple through the gallery as Alexandria raises her chin, locks eyes with the smirking prosecutor, and declares in a clear voice that silences the room. The defense requests permission to represent Mr. Reed, Your Honor. Before we dive into this incredible story of courage and justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves fair representation in court, and subscribe to follow Alexandria's journey from overlooked maid to courtroom champion. Now let's rewind to see how she ended up in this impossible situation. Alexandria Carter never planned to become the center of a high-profile legal battle at 28 years old, but life had already taught her that plans rarely survive contact with reality, especially for a black woman fighting to exist in spaces not designed for her. 3 years shy of completing law school, Alexandria had been forced to abandon her dreams after a combination of racial discrimination, financial hardship, and fabricated academic misconduct allegations destroyed her academic standing at Preston Law School, leaving her with student debt but no degree. Now she worked as part of the cleaning staff at Reed Tower, invisible to the wealthy executives who walked past her daily as if she were merely an extension of the vacuum cleaner in her hands. Each morning began the same way. Alexandria would arrive at 5:30, change into her gray uniform in the staff locker room, while mentally preparing for the subtle and not-so-subtle indignities awaiting her. Mr. Pastor Hoffman, the head of security, always insisted on checking her bag, both entering and leaving, though he waved through white employees without a second glance. The marketing director consistently called her Annie, despite 4 months of corrections, while the human resources manager spoke to her in deliberately simplified English, despite Alexandria's vocabulary being considerably more sophisticated than his own. During her lunch breaks, Alexandria would find a quiet corner in the building's vast library, pulling legal journals from shelves to stay connected to the profession that had rejected her, making careful notes in a worn notebook her janitor's grandmother had given her as a law school acceptance gift. One late Tuesday evening, as Alexandria cleaned the executive conference room on the 62nd floor, she heard raised voices coming from Nathan Reed's private office. Curiosity got the better of her professional detachment as she recognized the voice of Maxwell Price Reed's celebrity attorney, whose face regularly appeared on cable news and glossy magazines. "These documents are a problem," Nathan Price was saying, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of someone accustomed to courtroom acoustics. "The prosecutors will have a field day if they find these transaction records." Alexandria couldn't hear Reed's softer reply, but something in Price's dismissive tone made her pause near the doorway vacuum temporarily silent. "Just get rid of them," Price continued. "Financial records get lost all the time. Better missing than damning." The conversation ended abruptly as Price strode out, nearly colliding with Alexandria, before giving her an irritated glance that contained not a flicker of recognition, despite having passed her hundreds of times in the building. After everyone had left for the night, Alexandria entered Reed's office to empty the trash and straighten the furniture as usual, but her eyes caught sight of documents carelessly left on the conference table. Years of legal training couldn't be suppressed as she glanced at the papers, immediately recognizing structured financial transactions designed to appear incriminating when viewed in isolation. More significantly, she noticed discrepancies in the dates and authorization signatures that suggested document manipulation evidence that might indicate Reed was being framed rather than guilty of the financial misdeeds rumored throughout the company. Alexandria debated her next move for 3 days, knowing that approaching Reed directly could cost her job or worse. The wealthy executives she cleaned up after had made it abundantly clear that people like her were expected to remain invisible, not offer opinions on corporate matters. When she finally attempted to schedule a meeting through proper channels, Reed's assistant laughed openly at the cleaning woman who thought she could get 15 minutes with the CEO. Security was called when Alexandria politely insisted with Mr. Hoffman escorting her to her locker with a warning about staying in your lane. Desperation finally drove Alexandria to wait in the private executive parking garage, approaching Reed directly as he walked toward his Tesla. "Mr. Reed, I need 5 minutes of your time regarding the financial documents in your office last Tuesday," she said quickly, before his security detail could intervene. Reed's initial expression of annoyance shifted to curiosity as Alexandria rapidly explained the inconsistencies she'd observed, speaking in precise legal terminology that no ordinary cleaning staff would know. To her surprise, Reed dismissed his security and invited her into his car to continue the conversation. "How does someone with your legal knowledge end up cleaning my offices?" Reed asked. After she'd finished explaining her observations, his tone containing the familiar condescension of someone who believed hard work alone determined success. "The same way someone with your business acumen ends up being framed," Alexandria replied evenly. Powerful people decided it should be so. Their uneasy alliance began that evening with Reed reluctantly acknowledging Alexandria's insights, despite his obvious discomfort with taking advice from someone he'd never noticed before, despite her 3 years of employment in Wayne, his building. Alexandria agreed to help primarily because justice mattered to her, though she remained wary of Reed's privilege and his initial inability to address her without sounding like he was speaking to a child. The tentative partnership had barely formed when breaking news flashed across every financial network and social media platform. Nathan Reed, Billionaire CEO of Reed Innovations, had been indicted on multiple counts of securities, fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering charges, carrying potential sentences totaling over 30 years. The prosecutor's office issued a statement suggesting additional charges were forthcoming, with District Attorney Wilson personally appearing before cameras to declare this the beginning of holding the privileged accountable. Alexandria continued her regular cleaning duties to avoid drawing attention while helping Reed prepare for his upcoming trial, creating a surreal double life that stretched her already limited energy to breaking point. The stark contrast between her worlds became increasingly difficult to reconcile as she moved between them, mornings spent in her grandmother's small home in the Oakwood neighborhood, where gentrification threatened their tenuous housing situation, with rapidly escalating rents and predatory purchase offers, and evenings spent in Reed's 40th-floor penthouse, with its panoramic views of the very same neighborhood being systematically dismantled for a profit. Reed's primary legal team, assembled at astronomical cost and led by the camera-ready Maxwell Price, treated Alexandria with unmistakable disdain during the few strategy meetings she attended. "While we appreciate the cleaning staff's enthusiasm," Price had said during their first encounter, not even looking at Alexandria as he addressed Reed, "perhaps discussions of federal securities law should remain with those who've actually passed a bar exam." Alexandria had bitten back her response, reminding herself that her goal was helping uncover the truth, not winning personality contests with overpriced attorneys who billed $1,000 for the same hour they belittled her. As the team reviewed the prosecution's preliminary evidence, Alexandria noticed disturbing patterns that the high-priced legal team either missed or deliberately ignored. The evidence presented a carefully curated narrative of Reed's guilt, highlighting transactions that appeared suspicious in isolation, while omitting contextual documentation that would explain their legitimate business purpose. Even more concerning, Alexandria discovered through public records research that District Attorney Wilson had multiple connections to Evergreen Capital, Reed's chief corporate rival, and the company most likely to benefit from Reed's downfall. When she presented her findings in a meticulously prepared brief, Maxwell Price dismissed her work without even reading beyond the first page. "Perhaps stick to ensuring the coffee is fresh," he suggested, with a condescending smile, sliding her document aside. Reed, who had initially shared Price's dismissive attitude, began showing signs of recognizing the system's unfairness as he witnessed Alexandria face discrimination, not just from strangers, but from his own employees and legal team. During one particularly tense strategy meeting, Alexandria identified critical weaknesses in Price's defense approach, pointing out that his strategy essentially conceded the prosecution's framing of key evidence. With respect, Mr. Price accepting their characterization of the Westlake acquisition as tax-motivated rather than strategic surrenders. Mr. Reed's strongest defense before we even begin, Alexandria noted, referencing specific case law supporting her position. Price's face flushed with anger, as Reed nodded thoughtfully at Alexandria's analysis. Security Price called sharply, "Please remove Miss Carter from this meeting." As two guards moved toward her, Price turned to Reed with an ultimatum poorly disguised as advice. "Nathan, you need to decide if you want legal representation or cleaning services. This confusion of roles isn't helping your case." Reed's failure to intervene as Alexandria was escorted from his penthouse revealed the limits of his evolving awareness. He recognized the injustice, but not enough to risk his own comfort challenging it. Later that evening, Alexandria discovered, through careful analysis of Price's prior cases and financial disclosures, that he maintained business relationships with several board members at Evergreen Capital, suggesting potential conflicts of interest that might explain his strangely ineffective defense preparation. The more Alexandria investigated, the more she became convinced that Reed wasn't just facing prosecution, he was facing a coordinated effort to destroy him professionally and personally. The question remaining was whether Reed would recognize the betrayal before it was too late, and whether Alexandria would continue fighting for justice when the man she defended still couldn't fully see her humanity. The trial began with a media frenzy outside the federal courthouse cameras and reporters swarming like piranhas, sensing blood in the water as Reed arrived in a conservative gray suit, his usual confidence visibly diminished after weeks of trial. Public vilification. Alexandria watched from the public gallery, her cleaning uniform exchanged for a simple navy dress purchased specifically for court observations, though the court security had still subjected her to additional screening while waving through. White spectators with minimal checking. From the opening statements, Alexandria noticed disturbing irregularities that sent warning signals flashing in her mind. The prosecution's unusually specific knowledge of defense strategy, the judge's consistent rulings favoring the prosecution on even straightforward evidentiary matters, and most alarmingly, Maxwell Price's seemingly amateur mistakes that left critical government assertions unchallenged. District Attorney Wilson performed for the jury with theatrical precision, his voice rising and falling with practiced emotion as he painted Reed as an entitled billionaire who believed laws applied only to ordinary people. Alexandria scribbled urgent notes on her legal pad, passing them forward to Reed when court officers weren't looking object to characterization of Westlake documents as tax evasion scheme, challenge witness qualification on securities. Valuation. Move to exclude testimony about prior unrelated transactions. Reed would frantically push these notes toward Price, who consistently ignored them or responded with patronizing head pats toward his client, like a parent humoring a child's suggestions. During the afternoon recess on the second day, Alexandria cornered Price in the hallway, evidence folder in hand. "You've missed 3 critical opportunities to challenge Wilson's narrative," she said, keeping her voice low but intense. The prosecution's key witness just committed perjury about the Singapore transaction dates, and you didn't even cross-examine on the timeline. Price's smile never reached his eyes as he replied, "Miss Carter, I've tried over 200 federal cases. Perhaps leave the strategy to professionals rather than whatever it is you think you're doing here." Alexandria persisted, opening her folder to show documentation, proving the Singapore dates had been altered. "This isn't about experience, Mr. Price. It's about whether you're actually trying to win this case or deliberately tanking it. These records show you've represented Evergreen Capital subsidiaries 3 times in the past 5 years, while never disclosing the conflict to Mr. Reed." Their heated exchange drew attention from nearby reporters, who, true to form, transformed the confrontation into a salacious story about Reed's inappropriate relationship with his maid rather than the substance of Alexandria's legal concerns. That evening, Alexandria found a typed note under her apartment door. "Black women who don't know their place often don't live long enough to learn." She reported the threat to police, who took minimal notes and suggested she was probably overreacting to a prank, despite the clear connection to her involvement in the high-profile case. Her grandmother's health, already fragile from years of inadequate medical care due to insurance discrimination, deteriorated rapidly under the added stress of media vans parked outside their apartment and anonymous phone calls at all hours. Reed, meanwhile, watched his case disintegrate as the prosecution methodically introduced damaging evidence that seemed increasingly manufactured yet effective in swaying the jury, whose expressions grew more condemning with each day of, quote, testimony. The facade finally shattered on the fourth morning of trial when Maxwell Price stood dramatically as court resumed after the morning break. "Your Honor," he announced, with rehearsed gravity, "due to irreconcilable differences that have arisen between myself and the defendant, I can no longer ethically continue representation in this matter." The courtroom erupted into chaos as journalists rushed for the exits to break the story. The prosecutor smiled with barely concealed triumph, and Reed sat shell-shocked at the defense table, abandoned in the moment when he most needed advocacy. Have you ever witnessed someone being betrayed by the very person they trusted to protect them? Comment number 1. If you believe Maxwell Price was corrupt from the beginning. Or comment number 2, if you think he was just incompetent. Hit that like button if you're shocked by how easily the justice system can be manipulated against someone when powerful interests align against them. Subscribe to find out what happens next in this courtroom drama. Now the big question. What would you do if you were in Alexandria's position? Would you risk everything to stand up for justice, even for someone who never noticed you before they needed you? Let's see what Alexandria decides as the courtroom holds its breath. The courtroom crackled with tension as Judge Patricia Hampton pounded her gavel, repeatedly demanding order from the gallery that had erupted into frenzied whispers and exclamations following Price's dramatic exit. Reed sat alone at the defense table, looking suddenly smaller without his attorney's presence, his face ashen as he grasped the full magnitude of his abandonment in front of a jury already predisposed to believe the worst about him. Alexandria felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she stood, the decision crystallizing in her mind with sudden clarity. This moment represented everything wrong with a system where money and connections determined outcomes more than facts or justice. "Your Honor," Alexandria called out, her voice stronger and clearer than she'd expected as she moved forward past the gallery railing, despite a bailiff moving to intercept her. The defense requests a brief recess to address representation issues. Judge Hampton peered down at Alexandria with undisguised contempt, her gaze flicking meaningfully to Alexandria's skin before responding. "And you are Alexandria Carter, Your Honor. I have substantial legal training and familiarity with Mr. Reed's case. I request permission to represent him temporarily rather than forcing an immediate mistrial or continuation without counsel." District Attorney Wilson's expression morphed from momentary concern to smug amusement as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Miss Carter is not a licensed attorney. She's a cleaning woman employed at the defendant's company. This transparent delay tactic is the prosecution afraid of facing the actual truth of this case, Mr. Wilson." Alexandria interrupted, causing gasps from spectators who rarely witnessed such boldness in federal court. After 40 minutes of heated debate in chambers, with Wilson arguing vehemently against any accommodation, and the judge clearly inclined to agree with him, Alexandria's knowledge of a rarely invoked federal procedure providing for SDETI, temporary representation in extraordinary circumstances, ultimately prevailed, though Judge Hampton made it abundantly clear this was only to avoid an appealable issue rather than from any belief in Alexandria's competence. Miss Carter will be permitted limited representation capacity until Mr. Reed secures proper counsel, the judge announced upon returning to the courtroom, her displeasure evident in every syllable. However, the court will maintain strict oversight of all proceedings and will not tolerate any procedural missteps or delays. Alexandria took her place beside Reed at the defense table, ignoring the whispers and stares as she organized the case files abandoned by Price. "I don't know whether to thank you or apologize for putting you in this position," Reed whispered, genuine humility in his voice, for perhaps the first time in his adult life. "Neither," Alexandria replied softly as she reviewed her notes. Just tell me everything Price knew that you haven't shared yet. We have minutes, not hours, to prepare for cross-examination." The prosecution's smug confidence from earlier that morning began visibly eroding as Alexandria methodically dismantled the previous day's testimony through precise questioning that demonstrated far more case preparation than Price had ever exhibited. When the prosecution's forensic accountant attempted to restate damning conclusions about Reed's financial transfers, Alexandria walked him through a detailed timeline that revealed significant omissions in his analysis. "So, to confirm, Mr. Blank Patel, you testified that the March 15th transfer to Cayman United Bank demonstrated intent to conceal assets, but you didn't include in your analysis the February regulatory filing, explicitly declaring this planned transfer to the Bravadet. SEC correct?" The accountant's stammering response did more for Reed's defense than Price had accomplished in 4 days of representation. Judge Hampton consistently interrupted Alexandria's questioning with technical objections about procedure and form, many of which would have been overlooked for a traditional attorney. "Miss Carter, this court will not permit narrative questions simply because you lack formal training," the judge sniped after a particularly effective line of questioning had the prosecution's witness contradicting his earlier testimony. "Perhaps in your usual occupation, precise language isn't necessary, but in my courtroom it certainly is." Alexandria absorbed each condescending barb without visible reaction, recognizing them as desperate attempts to discredit her. After her questioning had begun exposing the weaknesses in the prosecution's carefully constructed narrative, the media coverage shifted dramatically by mid-afternoon, with commentators divided between portraying Alexandria as either a desperate publicity seeker manipulated by a billionaire or a legal savant whose career had been derailed by systemic discrimination. Both narratives missed the straightforward truth: Alexandria simply believed in justice and had the courage to stand for it, when professionals with far more prestigious credentials had chosen comfort and corruption instead. Her cross-examination of Reed's chief financial officer, Graham Phillips, proved the day's pivotal moment as Alexandria methodically led him through a series of questions about documentation authorization protocols. "Mr. Phillips, you testified earlier that all 5 transfer authorizations contained Mr. Reed's digital signature and therefore must have been approved by him personally, correct?" When Phillips confirmed this understanding, Alexandria produced internal security logs showing Reed's authentication credentials had been used simultaneously from 2 different geographic locations, a physical impossibility proving credential theft. "And would you like to explain to the court how you came to deposit $80,000 in an offshore account 3 days before these supposedly legitimate transfers?" "You're testifying about Alexandria asked with surgical precision, producing banking records that caused Phillips to visibly pale. As court adjourned for the day, Alexandria felt a momentary surge of triumph as she noted jurors making eye contact with her for the first time, their expressions thoughtful rather than condemning. That small victory evaporated hours later when she discovered her car vandalized in the courthouse parking garage. Racial slurs spray-painted across the windshield and doors, alongside a crude drawing of a noose. The security cameras covering that section of the garage had mysteriously malfunctioned, according to the disinterested security guard, who suggested she should be more careful where she parks. Checking her phone as she arranged for a ride home, Alexandria discovered her unexpected courtroom appearance had triggered an avalanche of online harassment, with thousands of anonymous accounts sharing her personal information, making 8 threats against her family, and questioning her qualifications with language that revealed their objections had nothing to do with her legal credentials and everything to do with her race. Alexandria maintained a composed exterior in court the following day, despite having slept barely 3 hours, dividing her limited night between preparing legal arguments and scrubbing hateful graffiti from her car. The controlled environment of the courtroom provided structure amid the chaos her life had become, though Judge Hampton seemed determined to disrupt even that small comfort with increasingly hostile rulings on basic procedural matters. "Miss Carter, While I understand formal objection, language may be beyond your capabilities. The court requires more than, "That's not right." When opposing counsel presents evidence, Judge Hampton remarked caustically, after sustaining the prosecution's objection to Alexandria's entirely appropriate challenge of hearsay testimony. Yet beneath the surface humiliation, Alexandria recognized something valuable in the judge's obvious contempt. Hampton was becoming increasingly careless in her bias, creating clear appellate issues that a higher court would find troubling if the case proceeded to conviction and appeal. While continuing Reed's defense during daylight hours, Alexandria conducted her own parallel investigation each evening, creating a detailed timeline of events leading to Reed's indictment and identifying the key players who benefited from his downfall. The pattern she discovered seemed too coordinated to be coincidental regulatory inquiries, beginning precisely after Reed refused an acquisition offer from Evergreen Capital, followed by targeted media leaks about Reed innovations, financial practices from anonymous sources, culminating in the federal indictment based largely on documents that Alexandria increasingly suspected had been altered or fabricated. Alexandria's investigation led her to reconnect with Terrell Washington, a former law school classmate who had managed to complete his degree despite facing many of the same discriminatory barriers that had derailed Alexandria's education. Now working as a digital forensics specialist for a major accounting firm, Terrell initially hesitated when Alexandria explained what she needed. "You're asking me to risk my career examining financial records related to an active federal prosecution," he said during their clandestine meeting at an all-night diner, far from their usual neighborhoods. "That's not just professional suicide, Alex, that's potential criminal exposure." Alexandria pushed her untouched coffee aside, leaning forward with the intensity that had once made her the most feared moot court competitor at Preston Law. "I'm asking you to help prevent a miscarriage of justice, orchestrated by the same people who decided we didn't deserve places in the legal profession," she replied quietly. "The documents they're using against Reed have been manipulated, I'd bet my life on it. I just need someone with your expertise to prove it." Terrell's reluctant agreement came with strict conditions about confidentiality and deniability, but his analysis of the financial records Alexandria provided yielded crucial insights within 48 hours. "These documents have definitely been altered," he confirmed during their next meeting, pointing to metadata inconsistencies invisible to the naked eye. The prosecution's copies show modification timestamps months after the supposed transaction dates, and there are digital signature anomalies consistent with credential theft rather than authorized use. Alexandria's separate investigation into the connections between the case's key players revealed disturbing patterns. District Attorney Wilson had received campaign contributions from Evergreen Capital executives totaling over $100,000 in the previous election cycle. Judge Hampton had ruled favorably in 4 separate cases involving Evergreen subsidiaries and attended multiple private functions at the estate of Evergreen's CEO Richard Keller. Most damning of all, Alexandria uncovered through public records that Hampton's husband had been appointed to a lucrative board position at an Evergreen foundation shortly after the judge was assigned to Reed's case. The most dangerous phase of Alexandria's investigation came when she determined she needed access to Reed's corporate server to verify her suspicions about document tampering. The evidence Terrell identified suggested the altered documents originated from within Reed Innovations itself, pointing to an inside collaborator working with Evergreen and the prosecution. Late one night, using her cleaning staff credentials and knowledge of security patrol patterns, Alexandria accessed the executive floor server room. The risk of discovery loomed with each passing minute as she connected Terrell's specialized drive to extract forensic copies of the relevant systems. A security guard's unexpected patrol route change nearly caught her in the act, forcing Alexandria to hide motionless in a server cabinet for 20 agonizing minutes. The extraction drive continuing its silent work inches from plate. Discovery. The evidence she obtained proved worth the risk. Original versions of the supposedly incriminating documents showed legitimate business transactions that had been skillfully modified to appear suspicious with metadata linking the alterations to Graham Phillips' credentials. Even more significantly, the server logs contained deleted email correspondence between Phillips and Evergreen executives, discussing Reed's refusal to sell renewable energy patents that could revolutionize solar storage technology. Patents that would be controlled by Evergreen if Reed's company collapsed following his conviction. Meanwhile, Reed experienced his own revelation about Alexandria when he discovered her academic history while researching potential replacement counsel. "You were Alexandria Carter from Preston Law School," he said with dawning recognition when she arrived for their evening preparation session. The moot court finalist who nearly beat Hudson National with that innovative equal protection argument, Alexandria froze, momentarily surprised by his knowledge of a competition from 5 years earlier. "Before mysterious cheating accusations ended your law school career," Reed continued, his expression troubled. "Accusations that emerged right after your arguments threatened a precedent protecting Wellstone Industries from environmental liability, a company whose CEO chaired Preston's largest donor foundation." The irony wasn't lost on Alexandria that Reed had unknowingly benefited from the same corrupt system now targeting him, though she took no satisfaction from his belated recognition of systemic injustice. Their partnership shifted subtly, following this revelation, with Reed demonstrating genuine respect rather than condescension when discussing case strategy. Alexandria's investigation reached a critical breakthrough when Terrell uncovered banking records showing Maxwell Price had received a 7-figure offshore payment 3 days before abandoning Reed's case. Mid-trial, the transaction had been carefully laundered through shell companies, but Terrell's forensic analysis revealed connections to a holding company within Evergreen Capital's complex corporate structure. As Alexandria prepared to present this evidence in court, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Terrell. "Your computer's been compromised. They know what you've found." Alexandria rushed home to warn her grandmother, arriving to discover their apartment door ajar, furniture overturned, and her research materials scattered across the floor. A single sheet of paper lay centered on the kitchen table with a typewritten message. "She's safe for now. Stop the investigation or that changes. Final warning." The next 12 hours became a nightmarish blur as Alexandria reported her grandmother's kidnapping to law enforcement, only to encounter skepticism bordering on dismissal from the responding officers. Elderly people with memory issues often leave home without notifying family members. The detective suggested with patronizing patience, despite Alexandria's explanation that her grandmother, despite being 76, maintained perfect mental clarity and would never leave without communication. "Perhaps she's visiting a friend you don't know about." Alexandria recognized the subtext beneath his words. A black woman claiming a conspiracy involving judges, prosecutors, and corporate executives sounded delusional rather than credible, regardless of the evidence supporting her claims. The detective's demeanor shifted only slightly when Reed arrived personally at the station, his billionaire status temporarily overriding racial dismissal, though the resulting search efforts remained perfunctory at best. Alexandria faced an agonizing decision as court reconvened the following morning: continue Reed's defense as scheduled or abandon the proceedings to search for her grandmother. The choice represented the cruel calculus. Marginalized people frequently faced justice or safety, rarely both simultaneously. Reed, showing genuine compassion that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier, used his remaining unfrozen resources to hire private investigators specializing in missing persons cases. "You focus on court," he insisted, showing more awareness of privilege than Alexandria had previously witnessed from him. "My team will find her. The people who took her are trying to derail both the defense and our investigation. We can't let them succeed on either front." Alexandria entered the courtroom that morning with leaden exhaustion permeating her body. Her professional appearance maintained through sheer determination, despite having not slept or changed clothes since discovering her grandmother. Missing. District Attorney Wilson, seemingly informed about her personal crisis, appeared particularly animated as he introduced the prosecution's surprise evidence, documents allegedly recovered from a previously unknown offshore account, directly implicating Reid in elaborate money laundering operations. The prosecution calls Special Agent Thomas Brooker, Financial Crimes Division, Wilson announced with barely concealed triumph. The federal agent's testimony presented a seemingly airtight narrative connecting Reid to shell companies used exclusively for concealing illicit transactions. Alexandria forced her personal anguish aside, focusing her complete attention on identifying inconsistencies in the new evidence. Her cross-examination began methodically establishing the agent's involvement timeframe before gradually exposing critical weaknesses. Agent Brooker, you testified these transfer authorization codes must have come directly from Mr. Reid. Correct? Alexandria confirmed, maintaining a respectful tone that belied her aggressive strategy. And that's based on the security protocols you reviewed, indicating only Mr. Reid had access to these specific authorization levels. When Brooker confidently confirmed this understanding, Alexandria methodically walked him through the actual security documentation, showing Reid's authentication system had been broken. Brooker confidently confirmed this understanding, compromised months before the transfer's information conspicuously absent from the prosecution's analysis. Her questioning gradually revealed that significant portions of the financial records had been selectively presented, omitting contextual information that would explain the legitimate business purposes behind the transactions. Throughout this high-stakes examination, Alexandria endured increasingly hostile treatment from Judge Hampton, who imposed arbitrary restrictions on her questioning that would never have been applied to a traditional attorney. Miss Carter, the court's patience with your unconventional approach is wearing extremely thin, Hampton warned, after Alexandria successfully cornered Agent Brooker into admitting he had not personally verified the authenticity of key documents. Court security officers acting on unclear directives subjected Alexandria to random searches multiple times daily, while white attorneys entered and exited without scrutiny. The racial dynamics became so blatant that several legal observers began documenting the disparate treatment for potential civil rights complaints. Reid, witnessing Alexandria's dignity under constant assault, finally recognized the discrimination as something requiring action rather than mere acknowledgment. During a lunch recess, he contacted media connections to spotlight the courtroom inequities, inadvertently making Alexandria a public figure at precisely the moment anonymity might have better served her missing grandmother's place. Situation. The resulting publicity divided public opinion dramatically. Many viewed Alexandria as a courageous advocate challenging systemic injustice, while others portrayed her as betraying her community by defending a wealthy white man. Both perspectives overlooked her straightforward commitment to truth, regardless of who benefited. The private investigators Reid hired delivered their first lead late that evening, discovering Alexandria's grandmother had been admitted to Lakeside Care Center, an exclusive private medical facility normally catering to wealthy patients under a false identity. Security footage showed her arrival accompanied by two men in suits who did not match family member descriptions. When Alexandria attempted to legally secure her grandmother's release, she encountered an impenetrable barrier of administrative obstruction. "I'm afraid we can't release a patient without proper authorization," the facility administrator explained, with practiced sympathy that never reached her eyes. Especially given the court order specifying state protection for vulnerable seniors at risk of exploitation. Alexandria's shock at learning of a court order she'd never been notified about transformed to cold fury when she discovered the emergency guardianship petition had been initiated through District Attorney Wilson's office, claiming her grandmother needed state protection from potential financial exploitation by family members involved in criminal enterprises. Her attempt to visit was blocked by private security, who threatened trespassing charges, allowing her only a brief glimpse through a window of her grandmother, in a wheelchair appearing disoriented in a way completely uncharacteristic of her usual sharp mental state. As Alexandria returned to her car, a hospital orderly discreetly passed her. An envelope containing photographs, showing her grandmother appearing heavily sedated alongside a handwritten note, continued defending Reed or advocating about her. Situation and the medication dosages increase permanently. Final warning. Have you ever had to choose between your principles and protecting someone you love? Comment number 1. If you believe Alexandria should prioritize her grandmother's safety above all else. Or comment number 2, if you think giving in to blackmail never works. Hit that like button if you're outraged by how the powerful can weaponize institutions like courts and healthcare facilities against vulnerable people. Subscribe now to see how Alexandria handles this impossible choice. What would you do if someone used your loved one as leverage to make you abandon what's right? Is there ever a situation where justice should be sacrificed for personal safety? Let's see how Alexandria navigates this devastating ethical dilemma. Alexandria maintained her professional demeanor in court the following morning. Through sheer force of will, her emotions locked behind a carefully constructed facade as she continued dismantling the prosecution's case despite the scracked psychological warfare being waged against her. The strain showed only in subtle ways: the slight tremor in her hands when organizing documents, the occasional unfocused gaze. When memories of her grandmother intruded into her consciousness, the barely perceptible flinch when Judge Hampton delivered yet another condescending reprimand for technical violations that would have been overlooked for licensed attorneys. Alexandria's cross-examination of the financial crimes expert proved particularly effective as she methodically exposed inconsistencies in the evidence chain of custody. So, to confirm, Agent Reeves, you testified that all digital evidence was maintained with unbroken verification hashes from seizure through analysis, correct? Alexandria asked, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. When the agent confirmed, she produced server logs showing multiple instances where evidence files had been accessed and potentially modified between collection and courtroom presentation. I moved to strike the financial evidence based on clear breaks in the chain of custody, Alexandria stated firmly, citing relevant precedent that even Judge Hampton couldn't easily dismiss. The judge's obvious frustration as she granted the partial motion validated Alexandria's strategy, focusing on procedural violations, created a record that would support appeal if necessary, while simultaneously weakening the prosecution's narrative. District Attorney Wilson, visibly rattled by Alexandria's unexpected effectiveness, responded with a desperate tactical shift. The prosecution calls character witness Lauren Michaels, he announced, introducing Reed's former executive assistant who had left the company under undisclosed circumstances 2 years earlier. Michaels' testimony painted Reed as racially insensitive and prone to belittling employees of color, clearly intended to drive a wedge between Reed and Alexandria while diminishing jury sympathy. Mr. S. Reed frequently commented that certain positions weren't suitable for minorities because clients would be uncomfortable. Michaels claimed her rehearsed delivery, suggesting careful coaching. Alexandria's cross-examination revealed Michaels had received a 6-figure consulting contract from an evergreen subsidiary shortly after agreeing to testify information the prosecution had conveniently omitted from witness disclosures. The prosecution's subsequent witnesses continued this strategy, making racially coded accusations about Alexandria's competence and motivations that went beyond attacking Reed to personally target his defender. In my professional opinion, people without proper qualifications who insert themselves into complex legal situations typically do so for publicity or financial gain, testified. Dr. Raymond Webster, a legal ethics expert, whose testimony seemed specifically crafted to undermine Alexandria rather than address actual evidence. Throughout these character attacks, Reed watched with growing recognition of the systemic racism Alexandria had faced her entire life, the constant questioning of qualifications, the assumption of ulterior motives when helping others, the prosecutor, casual dismissal of expertise, regardless of demonstrated ability. The transformation in Reed's understanding manifested in an unexpected way during the lunch recess when reporters shouted questions about his defense strategy. The most valuable lesson I've learned through this ordeal, Reed stated, deliberately cameras capturing his words is recognizing how my own privilege allowed me to benefit from systemic discrimination without ever acknowledging its plaque in essence. Existence. I've employed thousands of people in my company while maintaining practices that disadvantaged minorities in hiring, promotion, and compensation practices. I justified as merit-based while ignoring the uneven playing field. Miss Carter hasn't just defended me legally. She's forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about how I've perpetuated injustice while believing myself fair-minded. Reed's public acknowledgment of his own participation in systemic racism drew mixed reactions. Many viewed it as a calculated performance to gain jury sympathy, while others recognized genuine evolution in his understanding. His corporate allies reacted with immediate concern. Several board members releasing statements distancing themselves from his politically charged comments and suggesting stress had affected his judgment. The case reached a critical inflection point when Alexandria uncovered evidence that Judge Hampton had received a vacation property from Evergreen Capital through an elaborate shell company arrangement. The beachfront condominium in Barbados, valued at approximately $2 million, had been transferred through 6 different corporate entities before reaching a trust benefiting Hampton's family, with the original funding clearly traceable to Evergreen's Executive Compensation Fund. Alexandria prepared detailed documentation of the property transfer, including banking records, corporate filings, and property deeds establishing the connection between Hampton and Evergreen. Before she could present this bombshell evidence, 4 federal marshals entered the courtroom during the morning break, approaching the defense table with grim determination. Alexandria Carter, you're under arrest for evidence tampering, unauthorized practice of law, and witness intimidation. The lead marshal announced loudly enough for reporters to hear, producing handcuffs as cameras captured. Alexandria's shocked expression. The evidence tampering charge stemmed from her access to Reed's corporate servers, reframed as illegal hacking rather than investigation, while the witness intimidation charge bizarrely claimed she had threatened Graham Phillips despite no contact between them outside court testimony. The timing and public nature of the arrest, calculated for maximum media impact, suggested coordination between the prosecution and judge that went far beyond normal procedure. From her holding cell at the Federal Detention Center, Alexandria watched helplessly as news reports announced her arrest, with barely concealed satisfaction commentators debating whether she had been a willing participant in alleged evidence manipulation or merely Reed's unwitting pawn. The most devastating development came with the announcement that Reed's case would proceed immediately with representation by Harold Jennings, a public defender with a heavy caseload who openly admitted during camera interviews that he had never handled a white-collar criminal case of this complexity. The court has granted me 24 hours to review the case file before proceedings resume. Jennings explained to reporters, his overwhelmed expression confirming what Alexandria already knew: Reed's conviction was now virtually assured. Reed, finally understanding what Alexandria had sacrificed by standing for justice, made a decision that shocked his remaining financial advisors and attorneys. Against their unanimous recommendations, he liquidated significant personal assets exempt from the government's asset freeze: his art collection, 2 homes, and his majority stake in a technology startup not connected to Reed Innovations. To post Alexandria's bail and hire prominent civil rights attorney Vanessa Taylor to represent her. Miss.com. Carter risked everything to expose corruption when everyone around me prioritized their own interests. Reed told reporters as Alexandria was released 36 hours after her arrest. I'm simply following her example. Alexandria emerged from detention to discover her grandmother had been transferred to an undisclosed location, the Lakeside facility, claiming no record of a patient under either her real name or the false identity previously used. Reed faced a potential guilty verdict within 48 hours, as Harold Jennings, despite genuine effort, struggled to understand the complex financial evidence and procedural history necessary for effective representation. The systematic dismantling of justice had reached its culmination with those orchestrating the conspiracy believing their success assured, now that Alexandria had been neutralized and publicly discredited. Alexandria arrived at the courthouse the following morning with renewed determination, her brief detention having crystallized her understanding of exactly how the powerful maintained their advantage, not through superior arguments but through controlling which arguments could be heard at all. Alexandria Carter stands frozen in the packed courtroom, her cleaning uniform painfully out of place among the expensive suits. The judge glares down at her seconds from holding her in contempt for her interruption. The billionaire defendant Nathan Reed sits abandoned at his table after his high-profile attorney fled minutes earlier. "You should have been an attorney." Alexandria acknowledged his compliment with a tired smile, knowing such recognition came too late to help her grandmother or prevent the engineered conviction moving steadily toward completion. "We don't have time to fight every battle," she explained, reorganizing evidence files to prioritize the most critical issues. "We need to shift strategy completely, stop defending against specific charges, and instead expose the conspiracy driving them." Alexandria's revised approach focused on using the court's own procedures to expose the corruption that had permeated the case from its inception. Rather than challenging individual financial documents, a technical battle, the overmatched Jennings would likely lose. They would target the system of influence connecting District Attorney Wilson, Judge Hampton, and Evergreen Capital. The defense calls District Attorney Robert Wilson as a witness, Jennings announced when court reconvened, causing immediate objections from the prosecution team and visible alarm from Judge Hampton. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," the assistant prosecutor sputtered, while Wilson remained conspicuously silent. "The district attorney is not a witness, but an officer of the court supervising this prosecution." Alexandria had anticipated this objection, providing Jennings with precise legal citations, establishing precedent for compelling testimony from prosecuting attorneys when evidence suggested potential misconduct. Judge Hampton's reluctance to allow the questioning was palpable, but with a courtroom filled with legal observers and media representatives denying the motion would create an obvious appellate issue. Wilson took the stand with confident disdain that gradually eroded under Jennings' carefully structured questioning developed from Alexandria's detailed briefing. "Mr. Sate, Wilson, please describe your relationship with Richard Keller." CEO of Evergreen Capital Jennings began establishing the foundation for what would become a methodical exposure of conflicts of interest. Through careful questioning that revealed Alexandria's guiding intelligence, Jennings forced Wilson to acknowledge receiving campaign contributions from Evergreen executives while denying any improper influence. The questioning shifted to specific meetings between Wilson, Judge Hampton, and Evergreen representatives at private functions meetings. Documented through photographs and attendance records, Alexandria had painstakingly assembled. As Wilson's testimony grew increasingly defensive and contradictory, Judge Hampton made repeated attempts to limit questioning, each limitation noted precisely by Alexandria for the appeal record they were systematically constructing. Alexandria's investigation had uncovered offshore accounts connecting multiple parties involved in Reed's prosecution, and Jennings methodically introduced this evidence, despite Hampton's increasingly desperate efforts to exclude it on procedural grounds. The courtroom atmosphere transformed as jurors began connecting dots between supposedly independent parties, their expressions reflecting growing skepticism toward the prosecution they had previously trusted implicitly. Judge Hampton's obvious anxiety manifested in increasingly erratic rulings and transparent attempts to shield Wilson from damaging admissions. "The court will take a 30-minute recess," Hampton suddenly announced as Jennings approached questions about the Barbados property transfer, her typical composure visibly fracturing. During the break, Alexandria received an urgent message containing her grandmother's location, along with a clear warning end: the questioning immediately or face irreversible consequences. The moment presented Alexandria's ultimate moral dilemma: continue exposing the truth and potentially sacrifice her grandmother or abandon justice to protect her only remaining family. In a moment of clarity that transcended the false choice presented by her opponents, Alexandria recognized that partial victory would mean eventual defeat. The same corrupt system would simply regroup and target them more effectively, if not fully exposed. Alexandria made her decision, sliding a comprehensive evidence folder to Reed with meaningful eye contact that conveyed her unspoken strategy. Without warning, she walked quickly toward the courtroom exit, despite the bailiff's confused command to remain for the resumed proceedings. "Miss Carter, you are ordered to remain in this courtroom," Judge Hampton called sharply as Alexandria pushed through the doors, apparently abandoning Reed just as his previous attorney had done. The media interpretation proved predictably simplistic, portraying Alexandria as having fled under pressure, her credibility destroyed by her apparent desertion at the critical moment. What observers couldn't see was the coordinated plan Alexandria and Reed had developed through that brief moment of silent communication, a strategy requiring simultaneous action on separate fronts to finally break the corrupt alliance, targeting them both. Reed, having learned from Alexandria's example over their weeks together, recognized his responsibility to continue exposing the conspiracy himself rather than relying on others to fight his battles. When court resumed, he requested permission to question witnesses, personally citing the extraordinary circumstances of his representation. "Mr. Reed is not licensed to practice law." Judge Hampton responded automatically, her relief at Alexandria's departure evident in her relaxed posture. Neither was Miss Carter, yet the court permitted her temporary representation. Reed countered smoothly. "I request the same accommodation given the obvious conflicts of interest affecting my defense." With reporters documenting every exchange and Alexandria's groundwork establishing clear appellate issues, Hampton reluctantly granted limited questioning privileges while attempting to maintain strict control over admissible evidence. Reed, however, had internalized Alexandria's strategic approach more thoroughly than anyone realized. The defense recalls Maxwell Price Reed announced confidently his transformation from privileged defendant to active advocate completed in the moment he assumed responsibility for his own justice. When his former attorney took the stand, with poorly concealed nervousness, Reed presented banking records documenting the offshore payment Price had received before abandoning the case. "Mr. Price, could you explain why you received $2 million from a subsidiary of Evergreen Capital 3 days before withdrawing as my counsel?" The courtroom erupted as Price visibly paled Judge Hampton, frantically pounding her gavel, while unsuccessfully attempting to exclude evidence that had already been heard by the jury and recorded by dozens of journalists. Alexandria's apparent abandonment dominated media coverage throughout the afternoon, commentators dissecting her motivations with the shallow understanding typical of those who observed but never experienced systemic injustice firsthand. Sources close to the case suggest Carter realized her legal strategy was failing and fled before facing the consequences, one analyst speculated confidently on national television. This dramatic exit effectively destroys her credibility and likely ends any discussion of her as some kind of legal savant. What these commentators failed to comprehend was Alexandria's strategic calculation. By appearing to abandon Reed, she had created the opportunity to rescue her grandmother without alerting those holding her that an attempt was imminent. Alexandria's apparent surrender had precisely the effect she anticipated, causing her opponents to believe they had won and subsequently relaxing security around her grandmother. Using the location information provided in the threatening message, Alexandria arrived at an abandoned medical office complex on the city's outskirts, where private security contractors had established an improvised detention facility. The building's minimal security reflected their confidence that threats alone would ensure compliance, a fatal miscalculation that allowed Alexandria, accompanied by 2 private investigators Reed had hired to access the facility with relative ease. They discovered her grandmother sedated but otherwise unharmed, guarded by a single attendant who fled when confronted. Alexandria methodically documented the illegal detention scene before transporting her grandmother to a legitimate hospital, ensuring both medical care and official documentation of the abduction. Meanwhile, Reed continued his methodical exposure of the conspiracy without Alexandria physically present, having absorbed her strategic approach during their weeks working together. "What we're witnessing isn't just a criminal proceeding," Reed explained to the increasingly attentive jury, his privileged background temporarily useful in commanding attention typically denied to those like Alexandria. "It's a coordinated effort to seize control of renewable energy technology that could disrupt the fossil fuel industry's dominance." Reed presented evidence connecting D.A. Wilson, Judge Hampton, and Evergreen Capital in a conspiracy to acquire his company's solar storage patents, technology that could revolutionize renewable energy viability by solving intermittency, problems plaguing the industry. The patents, held personally by Reed rather than his corporation, would revert to company control upon his conviction, placing them under the authority of a board increasingly influenced by Evergreen-connected investors. The dual narratives of Alexandria rescuing her grandmother and Reed exposing the underlying corporate conspiracy converged as federal authorities, alerted by journalists covering Reed's revelations, began investigating judicial misconduct allegations serious enough to warrant immediate intervention. When Alexandria returned to the courtroom with her rescued grandmother and comprehensive documentation of the intimidation tactics used against her, she found a transformed environment. FBI agents stood at the courtroom entrances, having served warrants related to corruption rather than the manufactured charges against Alexandria and Reed. Judge Hampton had been temporarily removed pending investigation, replaced by Senior Judge Marcus Coleman, whose reputation for ethical rigor had earned him respect across the political spectrum. Given the extraordinary circumstances that have emerged, Judge Coleman announced after reviewing evidence overnight, "This court has no choice but to dismiss all charges against Mr. Reed with prejudice. The documented misconduct by officers of the court and coordination with private interests represents one of the most egregious abuses of the justice system I've encountered in 30 years on the bench." The victory, while significant, carried personal costs that couldn't be undone. Alexandria faced disbarment proceedings initiated by the State Bar Association, despite never having been admitted to practice a paradoxical punishment, highlighting the system's determination to maintain gatekeeping regardless of demonstrated competence. "You practiced law without a license," the Bar Association representative explained with bureaucratic indifference to the extraordinary circumstances. Regardless of outcome or justification, such actions cannot be permitted without consequences. The proceedings threatened to permanently end Alexandria's legal career before it officially began seemingly punishing her for exposing corruption rather than participating in it. 2 weeks after Reed's exoneration, as Alexandria helped her grandmother recover while searching for employment that wouldn't dismiss her, based on the controversial case publicity, she received an unexpected invitation to Reed's corporate headquarters, the same building where she had once worked invisibly, as part of the cleaning staff. Arriving cautiously, Alexandria was escorted not to Reed's office, but to a large conference room where media representatives, legal advocates, and corporate executives waited. "Today I'm announcing the establishment of the Justice Innovation Fund," Reed stated once Alexandria was seated, cameras capturing the moment for national broadcast. "This $20 million legal defense initiative will support victims of judicial misconduct, with Alexandria Carter serving as its founding director." Reed further revealed he had leveraged his considerable influence to challenge the circumstances of Alexandria's law school departure, resulting in her academic reinstatement with a full scholarship to complete her final year. The systemic discrimination that derailed Miss Carter's career was the same corruption that nearly destroyed mine, Reed acknowledged publicly. "The difference is that I had resources to fight back, while she had only courage and principle qualities that proved more valuable than my billions when justice was at stake." 1 year later, Alexandria addressed an incoming class of law students at her alma mater, her grandmother watching proudly from the front row as she completed the education wrongfully denied her years earlier. Justice isn't an abstract concept that exists naturally within our legal system, Alexandria explained to students who had applied in record numbers following national coverage of her case. Justice is created through the actions of individuals willing to stand for truth, even when every institutional force pushes toward convenience and corruption. The system doesn't yield fairness without demand. It must be held accountable by people at every level, especially those the system has tried to render invisible. As Alexandria concluded, her address television screens in the auditorium displayed breaking news indictments against 3 federal judges, 2 prosecutors, and multiple corporate executives, in an expanding investigation stemming from Reid's case. The Justice Innovation Fund had already supported 15 cases exposing similar corruption nationwide, while Reid Innovations implemented comprehensive reforms, addressing workplace discrimination and creating the most diverse executive leadership in the technology sector. Alexandria's personal vindication found its most meaningful expression, not in public acclaim, but in quiet moments with clients facing the same systemic barriers she had overcome, people whose stories deserved justice regardless of their resources or social position. The woman once dismissed as just a cleaning lady had transformed not only her own circumstances, but the fundamental power dynamics that had nearly silenced her voice permanently. What would you do if you witnessed injustice in your own life? Would you have the courage to stand up like Alexandria, even when the system seems designed to silence people like you? Comment your thoughts below if this story of determination against overwhelming odds inspired you. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about justice prevailing against the odds. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person with courage and conviction can change an entire system. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of Alexandria Carter, the woman who proved that sometimes the most powerful people in the courtroom aren't those wearing expensive suits, but those with the unshakable commitment to truth. Until next time, remember that justice isn't just served, it's earned through courage and persistence every single day. Alexandria Carter's journey reveals powerful truths about justice and courage in an imperfect world. First, true justice rarely arrives automatically through systems. It must be fought for by individuals willing to stand against corruption, even at personal cost. Alexandria showed that knowledge and determination can overcome institutional barriers designed to exclude voices like hers. Second, privilege blinds us to injustices until they affect us personally. Nathan Reid only recognized systemic discrimination after experiencing its effects firsthand. His transformation reminds us that awareness is just the beginning action, and accountability must follow recognition. Third, corruption thrives in silence and isolation. The conspiracy targeting Reid succeeded initially because those involved believed no one would connect the dots between seemingly separate actions. Alexandria's methodical exposure of these connections demonstrates how transparency dismantles corrupt power structures. Fourth, credentials don't determine capability. Alexandria's legal brilliance existed whether institutions recognized it or not. Her effectiveness, without formal qualifications, challenges our assumptions about who deserves authority and respect. Finally, lasting change requires addressing root causes. Alexandria's ultimate victory wasn't just winning Reid's case, but establishing mechanisms to help others facing similar injustices. By creating pathways for systemic reform, she transformed an individual victory into collective progress. The most powerful lesson remains. This justice often comes not from those with the most impressive titles, but from those with unwavering commitment to truth, sometimes from the very people the system has tried hardest to silence. Has there been a moment in your life when you witnessed injustice but hesitated to speak up? What would you risk to stand for what's right? Comment below with your thoughts on what gave Alexandria the strength to fight when everyone expected her to stay silent. If you believe our justice system needs more people with Alexandria's courage and integrity, hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when facing discrimination and corruption. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand up against injustice in their own life. Remember, sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to the person everyone else tried to ignore. Thank you for joining us for Alexandria's remarkable journey. Until next time, keep believing that one person with courage and conviction can truly change the world.